So, a character that I want to talk about is Lois's co-worker, Craig.
I love Craig.
Oh, I hated Craig so much. What?
Hello, everyone. This is Alex.
And this is Em.
Welcome to the latest episode of The Good, the Bad, the Basic.
This is a podcast for nostalgic Gen X and millennials and binge watchers of all ages.
On this podcast, we'll be discussing what we love, what we hate, and what's just a little bit problematic about the TV and movies that we're addicted to, and do a little bit of rewriting where necessary.
For much more exclusive content, become a show producer on Patreon and get access to after the episode bonuses, curated playlists, movie reviews, season finale and pilot episode reviews, and much more. Join the GBB family at patreon.com/goodbadbasic.
On today's episode, we'll be diving into the tales of the Wilkerson family, better known as the hit family sitcom Malcolm in the Middle.
Fox's Malcolm in the Middle was the breakout television hit of the year 2000, one of the last great family sitcoms, and one of the most successful American sitcoms of all time.
Very nearly titled The Wilkersons, the elusive last name of the show's family, Malcolm in the Middle focused on its titular character, the middle child in a poor working-class family, making him narrator to the antics of his and his brother's antics.
Debuting when the character Malcolm is 12 years old and ending when he is 18 and has graduated high school and attending Harvard University, this show had a great 7-season run with little to no decline in viewership and an even longer run in syndication and later on streaming services.
So what made Malcolm in the Middle so captivating? Why do so many people still love this sitcom? Stay tuned.
All right, so some critical details about Malcolm in the Middle. The show is a family sitcom, like we said. It aired from January 9th of the year 2000 to May 14 of 2006, lasted 7 seasons and 151 episodes. The creator of the show is Linwood Boomer. And the show stars Frankie Muniz as Malcolm, the titular character, Jane Kaczmarek as Lois, Bryan Cranston as Hal, these are the mother and father, Justin Butterfield as Reese, Eric Pursullivan as Dewey, and Christopher Masterson as Francis. So these are the characters that we're going to see the most of that core family. So Alex, why don't we jump into the family as a unit? What do we think of this family when we're first introduced to them?
They're chaotic. One thing I love about them is that they're working class, right? They're like a working class white family. They're definitely working class, probably almost working poor. Bryan Cranston sort of falling into this bumbling father role, which he gets better at, thank God, throughout the seasons. And then Lois trying to, raise these kids without losing her mind. But they're definitely not like your typical, I think, sitcom family. Or they will, because I don't know, I don't watch a ton of sitcoms, but I want to say, like, if we think of like All in the Family or some of these really older iconic like sitcoms about families, they don't, to me, like they're not like any of those other ones, because those other ones are very like Who's the Boss, All in the Family, stuff like that. Those families are very perfect. They're very like Brady Bunch. They're very together, and the Wilkersons are very messy.
Right. Malcolm's family is very messy, and You know, I did grow up watching a lot of sitcoms, and while there was imperfection to be had in those families, it was either very minor or something that they worked hard to sweep under the rug. I think what makes Malcolm in the Middle so different and what made it so great to watch is how that imperfection and that messiness was the premise and it was brought to the forefront. Another thing that I think made it great is that our Another thing I think made the show so great is that our title character, Malcolm, very, regularly breaks the fourth wall and speaks directly to the audience.
Right.
Which I think is a move that is very risky because it's often not done well, and it's done very well on the show. You really feel like it's more interactive, like you're pulled into the dialogue, and it's not jarring at all.
I remember, because I did watch Malcolm in the Middle when I was a kid, and I remember it feeling when Malcolm would break the fourth wall and talk to the audience, because it was specifically from his perspective, I felt like I was friends with these boys. Like they were boys that I was also growing up with.
Right. Malcolm speaks to us in a very conspiratorial type of way, right? Like you're telling a friend a secret.
Yes, he does.
Which is great. Like he doesn't stop to like narrate. It's like, and he does it in such a way, like the camera never zooms in on his face. He always looks over his shoulder like he's whispering something to a friend.
Right. The camera will cut from whatever setup. It's a slow push in, either it's a really slow push in to Malcolm, or the camera will cut from whatever coverage it's doing, and Malcolm will turn around in his seat and then talk to you about whatever is happening in whatever scenario, whatever is happening in the moment.
Right. So I want to talk about some of these relationships on the show. First, let's start with the obvious. Malcolm's relationships with his brothers, their relationships with each other. When the show opens, Hal and Lois have 4 children: Francis, Reese, Malcolm, and Dewey, and they're essentially the show's warped version of the core 4. They're very fractured. They're very messy. They're not even together a lot of the time because when the show opens, Francis has already been shipped off to military school.
Right.
What do we think of these brothers' relationships with each other?
Oh, well, they're so funny. I think they're so funny. Malcolm is obviously sort of, he's our narrator, obviously. So he's also, our person who is like the most level-headed and I guess like our most relatable character. And then Dewey is like, the youngest child, and Reese is sort of is the older one, but he's not as smart as Malcolm. And it's interesting. I think I like that their relationship is like at once adversarial and conspiratory at the same time with each other. They have like a solid bond with each other. I think a dynamic that this show gets really right is just the way that your siblings will sort of like beat up on you, but your siblings aren't going to let like other people beat up on you.
Right. And, the brothers have a pact that's pretty much both spoken and unspoken as the series progresses, that like the one rule you cannot break is like you don't rat out your brothers to mom.
Right. Because I just don't want to forget. And this even extends all the way to Francis, who is not even in their immediate vicinity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is why, like, even though I think on a couple of occasions they even go so far as to try to get their brother caught by the mom, they won't explicitly tell her that the other brothers are doing something. So one of the relationships I thought was interesting was a relationship that Reese, Malcolm, and Dewey have with Francis, especially in the early seasons. Reese is the oldest of the brothers still at home. And he kind of runs things, or he thinks he runs things, except that Malcolm and Dewey are much smarter than him. And they're running him half the time. But,
they are.
But like when Francis shows up, everybody sort of like defers to his leadership, because He is smarter than Reese, though still not as smart as Malcolm and Dewey, honestly. But he's also much older than Malcolm and Dewey. Like Reese is only a year older than Malcolm. And so they just defer to him as like the leader of their group. And because he got in so much trouble with their mom as to be shipped off to military school, his brothers sort of idolize him.
Right. He's infamous.
Right.
Right.
Until they realize that he's like a piece of shit and they turn on him.
Exactly. I don't remember what episode it is, but when Francis breaks out of like military school, or he goes AWOL from military school, you sort of see the depth of that. So one thing that I think this show was super jarring about this show. And listeners, I know this is not like our usual format, just for like sake, because Malcolm in the Middle is a type of show where it's just like closed episodic and each episode is its own complete story from beginning, middle to end. We're just sort of going to talk about the show in a very general sense, just so you know. But something that I think the show does that is really strange, that becomes jarring in the later seasons, is these transitions between the core family and then Francis. Like, I found myself not engaged by the Francis stuff later on. What about you?
It wasn't jarring for me. Like, for me, it was done pretty smoothly. I just didn't care about Francis. It sounds terrible.
But I guess it speaks to what I'm saying. Like, because I did feel that too, that like Francis stuff would come up or the Francis stuff would be going on. And I'm just like, I don't care about this as an audience member. And I do think it's a disservice that the show doesn't. But when Francis would come back or would be in the immediate vicinity of the whole family, I was enraptured, right? So I do think it's something, I don't know, I think that is like just a teeny tiny little something that the series should have, I think, explored more or been more on top. Because I also think something like that is super real, right? Like you go to college or you try to go out into the world and it doesn't work out. So you have to like go back and live with your parents.
Right. Well, I understand why they never brought Frances to live back home again, because Lois is a woman of her word. She kind of has to be, especially with those kids, because you give them an inch and they'll take a foot, right? And she had told him flat out, like, you cannot come back home. Even when he had left military school, he was unemployed and didn't have a place to go. She was like, well, you can't stay here. So I get why the Francis character was never brought home. And I also get why the show producers didn't completely just abandon the Francis character. Because let's be real, sitcoms have abandoned characters for far less. Like, okay, that's it. We're never going to hear from this person again. But I agree with Alex that the scenes with him were much more fluid and enjoyable when he was in the family home or around his brothers, just because his storyline was just so far detached from theirs, I feel, which honestly is a shout out to how strong the writing of the core family unit was, right? That he would feel like an interloper when this is his own family.
Right.
Like his character is like focusing on his character almost felt like we were taking time away from the people we really wanted to be focused on.
Right. Because you these hijinks with Reese and Malcolm and Dewey, for me at least, they never got old.
They never did. They never did. And just when you think these kids like it's over, like they can't think of anything worse to do, they do.
Right. So I want to talk about my favorite for a minute, Lois. I love Lois.
She's my favorite too.
She's my absolute favorite. And so it's interesting. So Lois is a mother, and I think there's a lot of discourse about mothers and like particularly like white mothers on television and sort of having to fulfill this very specific ideal of like white womanhood and white motherhood. And there's a genre now there's a genre like right now that I personally call like the shitty white mom drama genre, where it's just white women being like really shitty mothers and being celebrated for such. They're just like complete, like when I think of this genre, I think of like SMILF. I think of yikes. Yeah, SMILF. I think of Alicia Florrick in a way. That's harsh, but I stand by it. I think of Working Moms. I think of, that's a series on Netflix. I think of just there, like, I feel like, yeah, there are a bunch out there. It's just like there aren't a bunch coming to my head, but it's definitely like a thing where like white women are like really bad mothers and then like want to be celebrated for it. I mean, my gosh, even the movie like Bad Moms, that's like the whole concept of it. But Lois is probably the first incarnation of that type of woman or type of genre of archetype of a white mother, which is fascinating to me. And even then, I wouldn't say that Lois. I think the shitty white mom genre will grow from Lois, but she herself is not like a shitty mom. She is just like, she's the kind of, I think, white mother that people really talk about, that they say that they want to see, because she loves her kids. She loves those kids so much, but it is so hard on her, and she is trying her absolute freaking best to raise them with a sense of purpose. I love her.
Yeah, Lois is my favorite character as well. Now, the thing about these bad moms, and I'm specifically referencing the movie Bad Moms, is that they're moms who are bad, quote unquote, not because they're raising, well, one of them is actually raising their kids really shitty, but for dropping the ball or falling short of perfection. Lois embraces falling short of perfection, even though she's a very meticulous person, because she understands how much she's running. She's got all these boys and who might as well be an extra child in a lot of ways. And Lois is just someone who wants obedience and honesty. She's not even that stern, right? Because I remember when I was still doing writing TV and movie show reviews for a blog I used to have, I talked about Lois from Malcolm in the Middle. And people are like, nah, she was a terrible mom. And it was mostly white people, but there were a few POC in the mix. I'm like, let me watch the show again. The show was still on Netflix at the time. And I remember watching the show, and not only did I not think she was a bad mom, my opinion of her was even better than when I had originally watched the show. Lois is not very strict with those boys at all. Literally all she asks is that they be in the house by bedtime, and that they don't partake in any bullying, theft, or vandalism. The bar is so low.
The bar is low. And that they don't like fuck up her shit, essentially. Right? Because like they do some really, like the kids do some really like crazy shit.
Yes.
Like, and they do it everywhere. They do it at her job. They do it like in the street. They do it at the house. She's just like, can you just like put a cap on this craziness for like 2 seconds? But like I said, I do think Lois is a really good mom. Like you said, like she's this figure that like in, I think the white motherhood, and I want to keep saying like white motherhood discourse, because I don't think we actually have a bunch of representation of like Black mothers or other women of color who are mothers, which I think is a problem. So I do like to be specific. Well,
we do have them on sitcoms.
We do have Black mothers on sitcoms, at least, but I don't think I think the only like Latinx mother I can think of is One Day at a Time, which is a remake, right? And then if I think about like or uh, Indian or East Asian, I can't. Well, there's Fresh Off the Boat, finally, right? And that, but like South Asian, no, I can't think of any.
Right. I mean, and this is why I love sitcoms so much growing up, because that's the only place that I could see like an abundance of Black mothers. Black
Right.
mothers weren't on dramas. Black families weren't on dramas. So,
Right. But yeah, Lois, like you said, Lois embraces that, like, you know, she's not perfect. It's like, whatever, but she does the best she can. And one of the things that I love about Lois, and I think one of the more moving, one of the most like moving episodes is like probably in like in the way later seasons, season 6-ish, either 6 or 7, where Reese is talking to her and he's like, you threw me out and it traumatized me, and that you should not have done that, and you were always much easier on the other boys than you were on me, and I think you took out a lot of your frustrations on me, and it hurt me and it damaged me. And Lois looks him dead in his face and she's like, you're right, I'm sorry.
oh, you mean Frances, right?
Oh yeah, Frances, not Reese, my bad. I always switch up, but like, yeah, Frances.
I remember that episode. For me, there were so many moving moments with Lois, and I wrote down my list of favorite episodes from all 7 seasons. And it's, when looking back, it's no surprise to me that a lot of them were great Lois moments too. For me, one that probably wasn't as moving, but it happens very early on. And this is when I realized that like Lois is a G, Lois is a writer, Lois understands her children, was the episode 19 of season 2, where Reese is failing a class and Malcolm starts to tutor him, but then Malcolm ends up cheating for him. You know, Reese had previously told the family that the teacher had it out for him, and the family didn't believe him, of course, because he lies. And later, the family comes to the house and basically tells them that Reese failed another test. He's going to flunk out, this, that, and the third. And Malcolm exposes the teacher as really having it out for Reese, because the paper that, or the test results, whichever it was, that he gave to Reese was worthy of a B. And then Lois is like, wait, you were cheating for your brother? And then she turns to the teacher like, you gave something Malcolm wrote an F. You do have it out for Reese. And then she's like, and then the teacher, you know, tries to like backpedal, and he's like, listen, let's just all forget this, any of this ever happened. And she's like, no, I won't. I'm going to go to the principal unless you pass my son. And then she's like, well, if you go to the principal, I'll just tell them that Malcolm cheated. Do you really want that? And she says something that is jarring, because most people wouldn't think to do it. But she says, if you don't think that I would sell Malcolm out to protect Reese, you're completely, you don't understand me. Like, Malcolm is brilliant. He's always going to be okay, but Reese needs help. Like, Malcolm's always going to land on his feet, but Reese needs help. So Malcolm can take any blow. Like, if Malcolm is brought up for, you know, on disciplinary charges for cheating for his brother, he's still going to be okay. But Reese is a kid that needs help, and he's not going to have a lot of chances. And for me, this showcased such a clear understanding of her children. She really sees them as individuals, and she understands their strengths and their weaknesses.
Right. And you know what else? And I know exactly the moment you're talking about, the episode you're talking about. And something else about that I really loved was, in that you sort of have, before we have this language, right, to talk about learning disabilities and fixing behavioral issues and so on and so forth. In that moment, I was like, ooh, that's so interesting. Because like, there's a mother who may not have all the language to talk about specifically what is going on with her child, but has a inner understanding her child's weakness. Like you said, her child's sort of probably weaknesses and is trying to fight for him to have a good life.
Right, right. And this is something that I see when I look at older shows, and they don't have to be that much older. Malcolm in the Middle is not that much older, but if you go through like the lexicon of like older shows and older movies, you will see that a lot. People that don't have the terminology to define something, and maybe that terminology didn't even exist at the time when this was being filmed, but they understand the situation that they're in.
Right. And that's why, and stuff like that. And because Reese, you probably could, looking at the Reese character, he does probably have some sort of like attention deficit. So yeah, some sort of AD probably attention if we're gonna armchair it. Or there's just something where he can't just pick up on work the way other kids can pick up on work, and he's behind.
Mm-hmm.
Right, because Reese's whole thing is like he really is like it's like a real struggle for him to do well in school. So there is probably something there, and so the fact that she is cognizant of it and knows it and can pull that together is great. And it's why I never buy this excuse. I never want to hear like, oh well, we didn't have that stuff back then. I'm like, yes, you do. Like we absolutely did. But maybe it's just that we didn't have the language to speak on it, but it was there. But yeah, I love Lois, and Lois does love her kids. Just desperately loves her kids. And you're right, like there was always like a lot of hate around Lois, but yeah, Lois loves the crap out of those kids.
And Lois is the only one that knows how to love them, right? Like, I want to point out something about this sitcom that other sitcoms never show you, right? Like, in other sitcoms, even when these kids are beefing with their parents, they're still beloved by members outside of their family. This is not the case in Malcolm in the Middle. Hal and Lois are, and the Carnarvons, their neighbors, are pretty much the only people that can put up with Malcolm and his brothers. They don't really have that many friends outside of each other. They are problem. They are delinquents. This is not in Lois's head.
Right. If Malcolm and his siblings were like Black, they would be in juvenile detention. They would be in and out of juvie, like by the first season.
Right, especially the older two. Like Francis and Reese are simply not smart enough to keep themselves out of juvie, right? Like they would definitely be the first ones there.
They'd be the first ones.
I feel like audiences gaslight the fuck out of Lois by claiming that she's a bad mom, when really she could not be a firmer disciplinarian than she is, because obviously they would think she's a worse person. But she can't be more light than she is, because at that point it would be straight up coddling.
Right. Absolutely. So then
they love coddling, right? Because they loved Christina on Parenthood.
Right. They love a coddler. They love a helicopter mom. Which brings me to Hal, who enables this behavior out of those kids, right? I mean, he is one of them. Like, he's half of one of them.
Right. And like I said, in a lot of ways, he is like an extra child. The fact that Lois loves him and chooses to love him, because he's not her child, right? You don't have to love a spouse. Shows to me her great capacity for love, to be very honest.
Right. So Hal is part of this bumbling dad stereotype that we're kind of over, I think, as a culture, or at least I'm over it. Maybe I shouldn't be speaking for so many people, but I personally am not with it. But one of the great things about Hal is that like Hal does get better, I think, throughout the seasons. Mm-hmm. In terms of parenting those kids, like he does like grow up.
Right. And it's interesting about the Hal character, because Lois disciplines her kids even when what they're doing doesn't affect their family, right? If it affects their schoolmates, their school teachers, extended family members, neighbors, she will still discipline them. She doesn't let them get away with doing shit that doesn't affect her. But Hal does a lot. In early seasons, Hal only disciplines the kids when what they're doing affect him and Lois.
Right.
Like, he's just like, okay, it's really not affecting me. We're just not going to tell your mom, boys. If you take a shot for every time Hal says we're not going to tell your mom, boys. Listen, listen. How was an enabler?
How was he enables? He absolutely was an enabler, but I think Hal just I don't know. Hal is actually complicated in a sense because he's an enabler, but I think he's sort of like annoyed that he has all these kids. Like
Right.
and I don't think he realized how much work all these children were gonna be. So I definitely think there's a part of Hal that like gave up very early on.
Right. Hal and Lois are not coded as religious people, but they definitely don't come off as the type of people that use birth control.
Yes. Yes.
Like they are going at it raw. I can tell you that. They have another kid, Jamie, before the series, and in that series finale episode, Lois is pregnant again.
Right. Right.
So,
which is
yeah,
nuts.
this is wild.
And she flips out. She's like, and they both flip out. They're like, what do you mean?
Right. And I think they've been having those reactions pretty much ever since Dewey. Maybe they planned the first three, but they didn't plan them other kids. But they're definitely working poor. And what I love about this show is that while the family is poor, and Hal and Lois definitely have the frame of mind like, we're poor guys, get used to it. They never make the kids feel like the kids are the reason they're poor.
Right. They do. That's really real. They don't put that idea like on their kids. They're just sort of like, it is what it is.
Because that's a huge burden, right? And I think a lot of poor people do this intentionally and unintentionally. They either say or imply that they would be better off economically if they didn't have children or they had less children than they do.
Right. Or, I mean, just talking about, I'm trying to remember if there's ever times when they just flat out tell kids like, oh, like, we can't afford that. I can't afford that. We're poor. Like, if they ever come out and say it.
Lois tells them that we can't afford things a lot, and she tells them that they're poor often, but I think they work very hard, especially Lois, not to let poverty touch their kids insofar as basic needs. Like, the kids are always eating them out of house and home. The
Right.
kids are always vandalizing something that the parents end up having to pay for, right? But like, and they always get in trouble for the thing they do, but like Lois never says something like when they set some shit on fire, like, we don't have any money, how could you? Like, she just chastises them for setting the fire.
Right.
It's crazy. I want to talk about their house for a minute. So
Okay.
Growing up, I watched a lot of TV, and a lot of supposedly poor families lived in these really big ass houses. Malcolm's family house was quite small. He and his brothers shared a room. Okay. I think this was like a 3-bedroom house. Francis was the only one that had aged into having his own room. And none of the boys had moved into Francis's room, which later became Jamie's room. And Francis, Malcolm, and Dewey all shared a room, and their parents had a room. The house is small. It's one of the smallest houses on the neighborhood. It's got the shittiest yard in the neighborhood that's unkempt. And it's like tumbleweeds and dirt.
Right.
And poor people live here. Like, that's undeniable.
Right. The only other time I can think about, like on a sitcom or like a closed episodic show, family show of like the kids rooming up is like Boy Meets World, at least. Yeah, Eric and Corey share a room, even when Eric is like much older, right?
Mm-hmm.
Eric and Corey share that room.
And it was crazy that they were sharing a room because they show you shots of the outside in the back of their house. I know that house had more than 2 bedrooms. Stop playing.
Well, yeah. Well, yeah, because when Morgan finally comes along, Morgan gets her own room.
Right. So there was a whole other room this entire time, at least one other.
Listen, okay, foolishness, but. Yeah, they're all sharing, like they share the rooms. So it's not like they can afford a house with like multiple bedrooms, pretty much now every single family show sitcom kid does, right?
Right. I mean, I feel like I'm seeing like every kid getting their own bedroom more often now, right? But like Lois and Hal are very clearly in what should have been their starter home, right? When they had one kid and they were doing better. And in the flashbacks, we see a few flashbacks as the seasons progress of back when Francis was a toddler and an only child. Lois and Hal are dressed better. The house is nicer. This was their starter home that they never were able to leave as more kids came along.
Right, because of the expense and because of everything.
Right. I mean, I remember a show called The Torkelsons in the 90s, and this was about like a poor family, right? Where the mom had 5 kids. She wasn't a widow either. Their dad had left her. This white woman got left. I really need somebody to remake this show because it was amazing. Just the concept was amazing. And they were like literally living hand to mouth. And then the mom gets a job as a nanny and brings all 5 kids with her to her employer's home. And they're pretty much living on top of each other. And like our protagonist is her oldest daughter, Dorothy Jane. That and I think Roseanne's kids, where Becky and Darlene shared a room all the time. Though for a brief while, one of their boyfriends had moved in and was sharing a room with their brother, DJ. I think these were the closest I got to like really, really great iterations of being white and working poor.
Yeah, so Malcolm in the Middle will end in 2006, and this will be, at least to my mind, the last until Shameless, and even then, that Shameless was a UK show that was adapted for an American audience. Malcolm in the Middle will be the last show to my mind that focuses on a white working poor family.
I mean, the family on Shameless isn't even working poor, right? Like their jobs are often few, far between, temporary, erratic, right? Because Lip and Fiona are working when the show opens, but they're kind of bouncing from job to job and place to place, just trying to scrape and hustle. Like they're poor, and apparently we don't get to see white people living on top of each other unless they're living hand to mouth.
Right. And even then, I was like, I'm trying to think. Well, Fiona has her own room, which is real. But yeah, Debbie and Carl, or no, all the boys are together. And then Lip, Ian, and Carl are all together. But even then, that doesn't happen at first. I think first it's just Debbie and Carl are in the same room. And then Debbie is very cutely before is like, I'm a changing woman, like I need my own room. And then she gets her own, and then she does get her own room, but it's to the great sacrifice of like everyone.
Right. She and Carl had been rooming, and Ian and Lip had been rooming with the baby,
Right.
Liam. And Fiona only had her own room because she took Frank and Monica's room.
Right.
Like, so that house was packed. And I mean, the house is a 2-story house, but it's the Chicago South Side. It's a very narrow house. So that actually makes sense in a way that Boy Meets World or Seventh Heaven, having these kids sharing a room when the houses are gigantic, did not make sense. So back to Malcolm in the Middle real quick. I want to talk about how the Carnarvons and the intersection of race and class.
Yeah, let's do it.
One of the things that always struck me about Malcolm in the Middle is that Hal has friends, right? He has good friends. He gets together with his buddies every now and then. All of his friends are Black male professionals. He works like he's one of the many disposable rungs on a ladder, working at a cubicle for like an insurance company or something. Definitely not a degreed job. And all of his friends are like dentists, engineers, architects, but they're all Black. And as I got older, I think I realized why that was. He was too poor to join the rich white boys club, and they were too black to join it. And I see that quite often with black people even living in white neighborhoods, right? Where they're making substantially more money than their neighbors a lot of the time. But like, poor black people don't live here, right? If you're poor and black, like, you can't be in this environment.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So I always thought that was super interesting. And his friends are always all much better off than him. But one thing I love about Hal is Hal takes it on the chin. Even though the show tells us a couple times that Hal comes from a very well-to-do family, a family that disowned him when he married Lois, who they saw as white trash. Even though he grew up in wealth, and I'm sure it bothers him sometimes not being able to afford things, he takes being poor really, really, really well, especially when you're surrounded by affluence in the form of close friends.
Right. So the episode that you'll see, like you said, we'll see Hal a lot with these friends. And it is a specific friend group. But the Carnarvons, so Hal and Abe, there's an episode where Abe invites Hal over for like his, poker night. And Hal is like the most excited he's ever been in his whole life. Because he's like, oh, snap. Probably because also the thing that I also got from this was like Hal might have had like a bit of a gambling problem.
Mm-hmm.
Like Hal definitely did have like a bit of a gambling problem. But Hal goes over to play poker with Abe and the boys. It doesn't go well this first time. They get into this fight, and the way that the episode is written, you think that it's building to Hal being like, you discriminated against me because I'm a white man. But when we finally get to the turn, because I'm not a professional, like, you just don't like me because I'm working class. And Abe's like, no, like, that's not even a thing I'm thinking about. We never really get if like Abe thought that he really was going to say it was about race, but from it all, it is about Hal, being insecure that like these black men are all very accomplished and he isn't. What?
Oh, I was just gonna say I love that turn, because like, thank you whoever in the writer's room decided that on that specific turn, because it speaks to Hal's insecurities as a white man. He's never been discriminated on race before, and the character understands this, but he has been discriminated against because of class, right? Or because of the type of job that he has. So thank you for not trying to like throw in a reverse racism storyline in there. Like, thank you.
Right, absolutely. Abe and these specific group of black guys will recur through the series, and they'll all be friends doing like really funny stuff. Like, they play poker, and they all have like a singing like barbershop group. And they sing at like old people homes and all this really, really, really fun stuff.
I just want to mention how all the things Alex talks about with Hal and this friend group are just so pure and things I've never seen with white male friend groups. Like, it's always something so shady or sinister, or there's a lot of like homo antagonism and homoeroticism, I feel, in a lot of white male friend groups. It's really off-putting. I'm sorry, it's really off-putting. But Hal's friend group is just so chill, and they're just so normal.
So I want to talk a bit about Stevie. So Stevie is the son of the Carnarvons, right? Mm-hmm. And Stevie is in a wheelchair. He's disabled, and he has asthma. And he is, I think, probably one of the first friends that Malcolm makes, the brothers will make outside of themselves.
Right. And this actually happens because Stevie is the first person Malcolm's ever met who is as smart as he is And Stevie is the first person outside the family that Reese has ever met who like encourages a lot of his antics. I mean, at least the antics that are not targeting Stevie himself.
Right. And they have common interests, right? Like Stevie loves comic books, and so does Malcolm. And because the Carnarvons are better off, right, financially, they're able to sort of fund Stevie's comic book addiction. And Malcolm is able to sort of read these comic books secondhand from Stevie.
I thought the Stevie character was super duper interesting because he's in a wheelchair and you can see that there's quite a bit of ableism on his parents' behalf. They dote on him and spoil him because in a great way they pity him. But the Stevie character doesn't feel sorry for himself, and he actually knows this about his parents and often manipulates them with it, which I thought was brilliant.
Right. It's so smart. He and Malcolm will be in his room. His mother will come in, or Abe will come in. Stevie's like, watch this. And he'll wheeze and he'll use his inhaler. And then they'll be like, oh, honey, like, yes, of course you can have, cake for breakfast or something like ridiculous.
His parents were marks. I'm sorry.
They were marks. And something I love, and it's funny. So something I really, really love about the Stevie character and the Stevie character in relation to the brothers is that, which falls off when he gets older, and which is kind of upsetting, is he is in with them. He is all in with the brothers on all their antics, and the brothers are all in with Stevie. They don't treat his being in a wheelchair like it's a problem. They don't obviously, like, they can't deny it because, like, it's a wheelchair, you see it, but it's for them, it's just like, whatever, like, who cares? To the point where it's funny, Lois was so excited that, like, Stevie and Malcolm became friends, and then they get into some sort of, like, hijink, and Stevie gets, I think, messed up in the way that Malcolm's brothers mess things up, and Lois is, like, horrified because she thinks his mom is gonna, like, be like, oh, your children cannot hang out with Stevie anymore. And instead it's like, instead his mom comes back and she's like, oh, Stevie had such a great time. And even Stevie himself was like, this was awesome. Like, this was amazing.
Right. I did think that it was kind of sad to see Stevie no longer part of the antics anymore as the brothers got older. And I think that actually happened looking back because our titular character, Stevie's best friend, Malcolm, has a very real burgeoning interest in girls by this point. And I think that's something that actually happens a lot in a lot of friendships that you have when you're a child. Quite a few people, even as adults, kind of ditch their friends in a way as they start dating or thinking about dating or making moves and things like that. But I loved all the storylines with Stevie because, like Alex said, they were always very inclusive of Stevie and didn't act like, oh, well, you can't come with us because you're in that chair, or you're not fun because you're in that chair. I think this is something that the character needed, right? Because, like I said, even though he didn't feel sorry for himself for being in the wheelchair, I do think there's something to be said for constantly having people, his parents and his teachers, treat him like a baby.
Right. And which is strange because, like you said, like, Malcolm and Stevie are both intellectual, like, they're both on the same intellectual level. In fact, I think Stevie might even have a bit of an edge on Malcolm, which we see which you see in the later seasons when Malcolm is going to high school, and I think Malcolm ends up in, like, a gifted program, or Malcolm gets bumped up to a gifted program that Stevie's always been in.
Right. I mean, and the thing is, an argument could be made that Stevie got into that program because he has helicopter parents that want to get the best of everything for him, that will go speak to any teacher or any doctor. He's their only child, right? I know a lot of kids that should have been in gifted at early ages when I was in school, but they were poor kids. They were kids whose parents couldn't drop everything and come to the school for a parent-teacher meeting at whatever time, right? And this is just more on the intersections of race and class, but the Carnarvons had money, and that was never misunderstood.
Right. But listen, the friendship doesn't completely go because they do get into high school and they do like weird shit together, like grow bacteria from yeast and in science and stuff, like weird stuff.
Yeah, they don't do to him what they did to Pete on Smallville.
They're right. Oh no. We'll get to that. Yikes. Poor Pete. The token black friend that goes away. Yeah. And listen, and Stevie, at least Stevie does get his. There's like a really cute black girl who I forget her name, but she is definitely like a sitcom TV staple at that point. Her face is super recognizable. And Stevie does get to like, she and Stevie do like sort of hook up and get that going. And that's good to see. And I appreciate that. Like, I think it ends up with Malcolm or Malcolm's girlfriend sort of catching them with like her in like his lap and they're just going for it.
Right. And I love that too. Like so many things about the Stevie character were done right looking back because he was never coded as being intellectually inferior because of his physical disability. He was never coded as someone who was like, and this is a form of benevolent ableism, but always portraying disabled people as being really, really nice and altruistic and selfless. He was never coded that way. And he was also never coded like asexual. Like, you know how a lot of times they will put disabled characters, like teenagers and adults even, as like having no sexual desires.
Right. And that was never the case. Yes, Stevie is that's true. Stevie is a disabled character that is done very well. Because there are times when Stevie can be like a bit of an asshole.
There's a lot of times, girl. No, but like for real, like at the end of the day, Stevie is just a person and he's just a kid. And he does things selfishly. And he does have desires that don't include other people. And it's fine. Like he is a whole complete person who is also disabled. Like not defining the character or like writing the character's personality around the disability is actually one of the standouts of the writing on this show.
Right.
What were some of your favorite Stevie moments? Because I know you had some.
Oh gosh. So like I said, the girl, him and the girl, it's funny because the way they do it is sort of gross because they're like, Stevie could die any day now. But that is funny. But I do like that one. Oh, I love when they go to the carnival, the abandoned carnival. That's definitely one of my favorite Stevie-centric episodes. And I love this like science experiment thing that they do. What Stevie and Malcolm are doing this like science experiment for some sort of it's like some sort of competition and like Reese is like trying to be in on it and Malcolm and Stevie sort of fuck with Reese in the process and it's funny.
Yeah, the carnival episode is my favorite episode as well from Stevie, like the Stevie episodes. So a character that I want to talk about is Lois's co-worker, Craig.
I love Craig.
I hated Craig so much. Let's end on a high note. So I'm going to tell you why I hate Craig, and you can tell me why you love Craig. Craig is Lois's coworker who's like deeply fixated on her, infatuated with her, believes that he's in love with her. And where the show falls into like the useless bumbling dad trope, one soap or sitcom trope that it doesn't fall into is like the woman falling for or in any way taking pity on the man who's fixated on her. So he's like focused on Lois for years and years and years. And it's very obvious that Lois knows and is ignoring any thinly veiled overtures. And then when Greg finally comes out and says that he loves her, she not only like, she doesn't let him down gently. She like tells him off. And she's like, listen, I'm married. I have a family. I have never in any way given you reason to hope. I've never led you on. Like, the next time you feel the need to unburden yourself, don't. And I was so here for it. I was so here for it because sitcoms in particular have a reputation for like making you feel sorry for the guy that like basically was living out a relationship in their own head.
Right. I guess, obviously, I don't like that part, but I love Craig, I think, moving forward because it becomes apparent that, like, Craig is just, like, lonely.
Yeah, he is.
And I like that after all of that, like, they just sort of eventually accept him into their family. And he does become, like, that neighbor guy who's just always there. And particularly like, when the kids, it's either the kids or it's Hal, like, burn down his house.
Yeah.
And he has to stay with them. That's amazing.
Yeah, I remember. Oh God, I remember that. I remember that whole plot now. That was funny. And I agree that once he got over this, like once we didn't have to see him like stalking Lois at work anymore. Craig became a really, really great character.
Right. He just becomes really funny and like he does funny stuff. Like when he like sings like opera in the shower and then he continues to like sing it in the house. And like he has like his jazzercise that he like just is like pumping in the house. Like I love all of it.
Right. You know what's interesting about the Craig character? Craig is like, if we're going purely on definition and voluntary celibacy, Craig is an incel, right? But he doesn't have any of modern incel behaviors. Like, he's not out here thinking that he can rape women. He's not out here stalking people and following them around town or at their homes. And he doesn't have a mean bone in his body.
Right. He's just sort of, living his life the best he knows how, Like I said, like he's lonely and that's upsetting, but I like that he takes it upon himself to just try to find his own happiness.
Right. And you might not get the thing that you want, but like he never resigns himself to being unhappy, right? He's like, okay, I didn't get this thing. Let me try something else. So in that regard, I will say that like Craig is an example for us all.
He is. He's an example for us all. And yeah, he does. He's like, let me go find something I actually want, or like let me find and do the things in life that bring me joy. And that's, girl, that's a message even for today.
It is. It is a message. So I think we got all the major characters. So I want to talk about like the subplot of like Stevie's mom. So early in the series, Stevie's mom, Kitty Carnarvon, leaves the family. Like she abandons. Yeah, she leaves Abe and her son, Stevie. And she gets all the hoeing done that she didn't get done in her 20s. And she eventually comes back like 1 or 2 seasons later. And it's interesting because Malcolm and his brothers are like happy for Stevie that his mom is back. But like Lois, and this is, again, Lois has such great moments. Lois is very protective. She's like, I don't know if I want this woman back. She's going to hurt Stevie again. I will not let Stevie be hurt again.
Right. And I remember that. And I love that because I think it speaks to how grateful Lois is that like Malcolm met Stevie, or Malcolm and Stevie became friends, and that Malcolm has someone in his life that was intellectually stimulating for him and like challenging for him, and in the ways that she appreciates just Stevie in his own right.
Right. I mean, she doesn't treat Stevie any differently than her own sons. You can't even say that she's like less warm with him because Lois is not a warm person with her own children, right? She's, especially after Kitty left, we saw the Stevie character become a little bit more integrated into the plots in that particular season. If Lois didn't have a reaction, I probably would have thought nothing of it because a lot of times on TV, a lot of parents aren't really that invested in their children's friends, especially their children's Black friends. So the fact that she had a reaction really stood out to me, and the fact that she had that reaction was, I thought, really beautiful.
Absolutely. So let's talk about Dewey for a minute.
Mm-hmm.
So Dewey initially is your typical sort of youngest child before the new baby. He's the baby. He's sort of he's trying to to be with his brother. They're like, you're the baby. But he does sort of find ways to needle himself in there. But something that is interesting about Dewey is that Dewey will be the next gifted child that they have, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he's not gifted in math and science like Malcolm is. He's gifted artistically.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't.
He's an innovator.
Yeah, he's an innovator. He's very and I'm specifically, and we'll see it a bunch throughout the back half of the series. You'll see it a bunch throughout the back half of the series, but I'm thinking particularly about the opera episode where Stevie writes an entire opera from his parents fighting. Or not mm-hmm. Stevie, Dewey. Dewey writes an entire opera from his parents fighting. But they will not, it's interesting. I guess the thing that I want to highlight is that they will not, Lois and Hal will sort of not push that the way I think they've pushed or really looked out for Malcolm, which is interesting.
So I thought the same thing. And seeing these things, and Alex says we see them a lot, like Dewey's genius is really frustrating. No one in his family really take notice of it. There's one episode in particular where he builds an entire organ out of spoons and forks and tin cans, right? He builds a musical instrument, you guys. And Hal completely destroys it without ever even having noticed what it was. And it wasn't until the last episode that I realized, wow, Hal just really does not see how brilliant his son is. Lois sees it and understands that he's self-motivated enough. The reason why she fought so hard to get Malcolm in these particular classes or in these gifted programs was because Malcolm is someone who needs guidance. If he wasn't pushed to be excellent, he would just fall from the wayside. Whereas Dewey keeps on trucking and keeps on keeping on no matter what. In the graduation episode, which was the series finale episode, where the family has been covered in toxic waste and sewage. Watch the episode to figure out why. Right before going to Malcolm's graduation, and they completely collapse and fall apart, and everyone starts shouting, and she's like, listen, do you think you're supposed to have an easy life? Invent something cool, get rich and have lots of money? No, that's going to be Dewey's life. She already knows that's going to be Dewey's life. You think you're not going to go to college and still be brilliant and still have a great life? No, that's Dewey's life. She already knows, Dewey don't even need school. He's brilliant. So she already has all their lives planned out. She knows their strengths and weaknesses, and she makes it clear. And then Dewey's like, what? For real? That's going to be my life? Because she sees it in him. She sees who her children are. And out of all her children, Reese is Dewey's the only one that doesn't need to be pushed to be his best.
That's true. Okay. I get that. Okay. So I get that.
But I think that Hal legitimately didn't understand that Reese was that Dewey was brilliant because it's Hal. Hal doesn't notice anything.
Hal doesn't notice anything. But I will say that Hal and Lois probably have one of the best TV marriages. Hal doesn't notice anything with the kids, but I think Hal doesn't notice anything in general, but like when it's pointed out to him, he tries. And I think like in particular with his marriage for Lois, I do think he tries. Not early on, because like when they all forget her birthday, I was just like, oh my God, no. Like at that moment, if she had decided to walk out, I wouldn't have said it was right, but I would have understood.
But it's okay.
And in the later seasons, I think in the mid to late seasons, you do see Hal actively trying, actively working on his marriage, making sure that he is supporting his wife in the ways that he can, particularly in that, like, he's never really like demanding of her to like be a certain weight or look a certain way or whatever. And that happens like in an episode where I think Lois is just like feeling insecure about, like we all do, about the way we look. And sometimes, and you know, Hal reinforces to her, is like, I wouldn't want you any other way. Like your body is because like you birthed all these freaking kids, like, and that's amazing. And I still love you. Like I still want to, like, I'm still attracted to you.
Right. I think one of the best episodes insofar as illuminating Hal's love for Lois is the episode that Alex just named. And also one of my favorites from season 3. This is episode 14, Cynthia's Back. At that episode, one of Lois's acquaintances, one of the other neighborhood moms that she and Hal were at a New Year's Eve party with several years ago, is in AA and comes to the house to make amends with Lois for kissing Hal at a New Year's Eve party. And Hal's like, listen, that bitch must have been drunk because I never kissed her. I haven't kissed anyone since I met you. And she's like, well, and Lois is like, well, she's a really attractive woman. And he's like, I wouldn't know. And then she's like, you're telling me after all these years, you've never seen another woman that turns your head? And he's like, no. And he's offended that she would even bring it up. And she's like, well, I think about other people. And he's like, well, I don't. And she's like, well, if you don't, then that means that you love me more. And he's like, yeah, I love you more. I know that. I've always loved you more. I mean, imagine what our lives would be if you loved me the same way that I loved you. We would get nothing done. Which was, I thought, really, really beautiful, that like he was very cognizant of the fact that he loved the most and he was comfortable with it, right? He was very comfortable with it.
Right.
But there's still a lot of beautiful moments with Lois and Hal. And it's made very clear, not just from all the kids, but a conversation that she has with Francis when he's having conversations with Piama once they're newlyweds, that she and Hal fuck a lot. And it's really good. And it's really good. And she says, quote, sometimes your father puts it on me so good that I forget how to spell my own name. It's a 4-letter name, you guys. So, yeah, Hal is fulfilling, he's upholding some of his husbandly duties, at least.
Right.
I want to talk about the character that I absolutely despise. The character on the show who's actually a bad mom, and that is Lois's mom, Ida.
Ida's the worst.
Ida's the absolute worst, you guys.
Although I respect, because she's like she is racist, right? She says a lot of crazy shit, right?
She's every-ist.
Right.
She's everything, you guys.
I do respect this show because we talk about that, about how like white families are racist, but then like nowadays like white writers like to pretend that like nobody in the family is racist. She is, and like I respect the show for that. That they're just like, yeah, she sucks.
She's racist, she's ableist, she's homophobic, she's queer antagonistic. She's everything but classist, and that's just because she happens to be poor. So it's interesting too because they're an immigrant family. Like Lois's mom is from the old country, and I don't know what country specifically the old country is supposed to be. I don't know if it's Croatia or Serbia. I think it's one of those two.
It's
But
one
I'm
of
not
those
sure.
Eastern European countries.
Yeah, I mean, it could be Croatia, it could be Serbia, it could be Yugoslavia. It's one of those old countries. It's definitely not Russia, but it's one of the others. I thought that was interesting because this is something that writers do quite often, right? They give you the very defensive, the very aggressive, the very offensive immigrant character. And I think the fact that Lois's mom was an immigrant was what allowed them to be honest about the type of person she is.
That's an interesting thought.
They really don't like to paint like, born and raised Americans in that same light. I see this often. Like anytime I see like a racist white character in these types of narratives, they're like a quote foreigner, which I think is interesting. It's something to think about, especially when you think about like Americans' attitudes to these immigrant groups as they were coming in and basically other them until it became absorbed in the fabric of American whiteness.
Right.
Now, in the show at large, I think, is a subtle indictment on classism and wealth hoarding because it completely blows the notion out of the water that poor people are poor because they don't work hard enough. Malcolm's parents work.
Right, absolutely. So Hal and Lois work very hard, like extremely hard. I think at one point Lois has her job at that CVS store and she's doing some sort of like multi-level marketing hustle as well.
Right. Yeah, it's like a knockoff CVS or Rite Aid. I think it's called like Lucky Aid, wherever they work. And she does a multi-level marketing. She's running the house. Like her and Reese are the only people in the house who know how to cook and who cook. And then on top of that, she will cover Craig's shifts quite often, working double shifts very often. So they're hustling, and that's just to keep their heads above water, to make sure that the bills are paid and that the kids are fed.
Exactly. And
what the show does brilliantly is it doesn't just tell you the kids are poor. It shows you the kids are poor. Malcolm and his brothers recycle wardrobe often. Like we'll see them wearing the same thing, the same clothes they wore like 3 or 4 episodes ago on a new episode. Or there's one episode in particular where they're headed to a funeral and Reese's suit doesn't fit anymore. So they give him one of his dad's old suits and they give Malcolm his old suit and they give Malcolm's old suit to Dewey. So this is something that the show is very, very cognizant of, and they definitely play with, is how clothes are just another marker of your class.
Right, and being able to buy them or infrequently, and to be able to buy them super frequently. And another time we see this is when Lois drags the boys back to school shopping. It's either like Black Friday or it's some type of Black Friday like thing, and she's trying to. And they're incensed to be there, but she's trying to be like, listen, these are the rules. You got to get to this bin by this time. And if you like have to, and, if you got to shove some old ladies out of the way, then that's what you got to do. But like, this is serious because like, this is the only time that I'll be able to buy you clothes in like the next couple of years.
Right. Right. So she has to go with a game plan. She's got to take it seriously. She's got to make sure the boys take it seriously. And, conversations about things like that, clothing, food. There's another great episode about food where like, it's Lois and Hal's anniversary and Hal gets some cuts of meat, but the 2 best cuts of meat are for him and Lois. And he enlists Reese to cook the meat. And, tells them, okay, these are for me and your mom, and these are for your brothers. Cook them, go in your room, and then leave us alone. And then, like, Reese tries to swap out the cuts of meat, and then Hal swaps them back, and then Reese swaps them back again. And it's on and on and on like that, with, like, him trying to save the best cuts of meat for himself and his wife on this, like, one occasion. And it's small things like that, right? Because we don't talk about how expensive meat is and how different cuts of meat have different prices.
there's an episode, and I'm just curious as to like what your take was on it, but there's an episode where, and I think it is that back to school shopping episode, where Lois imagines she's just fed up with the boys, and she imagines what would it be like if she had had all girls instead.
Yes. I remember that episode. And wasn't it like in her imagination, the girls were more expensive and drove her crazier?
Yeah, like eventually. Like at first, it's sort of like this utopia, and they're like really. And then I think she gets honest with herself, and they want a bunch of stuff, and they drive her like even crazier than the boys.
I think Lois would be a good mom to daughters because she's doing a much better job than Ida ever did with her and her sister. But I think that episode was realistic to the ways that people view raising girls, not necessarily how it actually is raising girls. And I've made that comment before, like back when we discussed parenthood. A lot of these episodes are realistic to how certain people behave towards other people, not necessarily how those people are. I don't think it's harder or even more expensive to raise daughters, but I think we've got it into our head as a society that women are very superficial. Women really love accessories. Women love shopping, et cetera, et cetera. Having daughters will put you in the poorhouse. Like, no one even talks about how much teenage boys eat.
Right. They eat so much. And food can be so expensive. So speaking of gender roles, women, let's talk about, so Hayden Panettiere, like a young Hayden Panettiere shows up on the show playing the character named Jessica.
Mm-hmm.
And she babysits the boys, much to their dismay. But
yeah, she's adorable.
She's adorable, but she overcomes the boys because she is she's more manipulative than they are.
Mm-hmm.
And she's smarter about being manipulative than they are. So do you remember her character?
Yeah, I remember her very vividly. And this is something I suspected when she first babysat them, but in one of my favorite episodes, season 7, episode 5, Jessica Stays Over, we learn like Jessica's like an actual sociopath. Like, she's not violent, she's not evil, but she is a world-class manipulator and gets off on manipulating people to get what she wants.
Right.
Even when she was telling Malcolm what she was doing, she was manipulating him, which was like world class. Like, it was a manipulation inception.
Yes. I like her. She's funny. She's adorable. But I don't know. There's something about her character, that plot, that didn't sit right with me. Or were you all in on her?
I wasn't all in on her. Jessica left a bad taste in my mouth, and I think it's because Hayden Panettiere is so adorable, right? We have this white girl who's like, she's not a compulsive liar. Compulsion, implies that you can't help it, right? She's a very calculated, lying sociopath. And she's cute, and she's blonde, and she's pocket-sized, and she's exactly the type of white woman that ruins lives.
Okay.
That's why she didn't sit well with me.
Yeah, I think I was just like annoyed at, like, I don't know. There was just always something about, I think, that character, that characterization that like bugged me, that I could never quite put my finger on, of like why it bugged me. But I don't know.
No, I think that was me with Abby Morgan. I couldn't for sure tell you why. I mean, I knew why the character bothered me, but I didn't want her to even be on the show on Dawson's Creek. And I couldn't for the life of me, I couldn't like articulate why I thought that character should have never existed. But no, I mean, to her credit, Hayden Panettiere plays the role of Jessica quite well. And I actually see glimpses of Jessica in her character Juliet on Nashville. Not that Juliet's a sociopath, but Juliet is someone who's like cool with lying to get her way. She's just not as good at it as Jessica is. So let's jump into our favorite episodes. Just run down all 7 seasons and tell the audience our episodes, our favorites. Do you want to kick it off, or should I?
You can kick it off.
Alrighty then. Let's start with season 1. My first episodes from season 1 are episode 1, the pilot episode. Episode 5, Malcolm Babysits. And episode 12, which was Cheerleader. And episode 2, my favorite episodes were Halloween Approximately, which was number 3, Lois's Birthday, number 10, The Bully, and episode 16, The Grandparents. This is when we meet Lois's parents for the first time. Great episode. Favorite episodes from season 3 would be episode 3, Book Club, episode 4, Malcolm's Girlfriend, episode 7, Christmas, and episode 14, Cynthia's Back. Favorite episodes from season 4, episode 3, Family Reunion, episode 4, Stupid Girl, and episode 11, Long Drive. From season 5, my favorite episodes are episode 2, Watching the Baby, episode 3, Goodbye Kitty, episode 13, Lois's Sister, and episodes 21 and 22, Reese Joins the Army, part 1 and 2. From season 6, my favorite episodes are episode 5, Kitty's Back, episode 11, Dewey's Opera, and episode 18, Ida's Dance. And season 7, last but not least, most of my favorites are actually in this season. Episode 2, Health Insurance. Episode 5, Jessica Stays Over. Episode 13, Mono. Episode 15, AA. Episode 17, Hal's Dentist. And episodes 21 and 22, which were MORP, that's prom spelled backwards, and Graduation.
Right. Those are all really solid ones. We'll definitely have some overlap with my favorites as well. So season 1, I like season 1, episode 2, Red Dress. Season 1, 6, Sleepover. I like episode 11, Funeral. Episode 14, Bots and Bees. And then episode 15, Smum Day, which is like Sunday with an M after the S. And then episode 16, Water Park. From season 2, I also like Lois's Birthday, episode 3, Lois' Birthday. Episode 6, Convention. Episode 17, Surgery. Episode 18, Reese Cooks. 23, Carnival. And then 25, Flashback in season 2. In season 3, I like episode 2, Emancipation. Episode 8, Poker. Episode 9, Reese's Job. Episode 18, Poker 2. I skipped one. Episode 17, Dewey's Dog. Episode 20, Jury Duty. And then episode 21, Clicks. Then 4, I really like episode 3, Family Reunion. Episode 4, Stupid Girl. Episode 6, Forbidden Girlfriend. Episode 10, If Boys Were Girls, which we mentioned earlier. Episode 15, Garage Sale. Episode 19, Future Malcolm. Episode 20, and then episode 20 and 21, Baby Part 1 and Part 2. So then from season 5, I really like season 5, episode 3, Goodbye Kitty. And that's when, I mentioned this, when Stevie's mom is like, deuces. Episode 4, Thanksgiving. Episode 6, Malcolm's Job. Episode 5, Malcolm Films Reese. Episode 10, Hot Tub. Episode 16, Malcolm Visits College. Episode 18, Dewey Special Class. Episode 19, Experiment. And that's it in season 5 for me. Season 6, I really like the season opener, Reese Comes Home. That's episode 1. Episode 5, Kitty's Back, which is another one we mentioned. Abe's wife comes back, and that's episode 5. Episode 6, Hal's Christmas Gift. Episode 9, Malcolm's Car. Episode 11, Opera. And then episode 13, Tiki Lounge. Episode 14, Ida Loses a Leg. Episode 17, Butterflies. Episode 19, Motivational Speaker. And then episode 22, Mrs. Tri-County. And then for the final season, season 7, I really liked episode 1, Burning Man. Episode 3, Reese versus Stevie. Episode 6, Secret Boyfriend. Episode 10, Malcolm's Money. Episode 15 as well, AA. Episode 16, Lois Strikes Back. Episode 17, Hal's Dentist. Episode 19, Stevie in the Hospital. And then episode 22, the series finale, Graduation.
Right. I love all of those. I'm going to be very clear, you guys. I'm a big stan of Malcolm in the Middle. Malcolm in the Middle is my favorite sitcom, hands down. And that's saying a lot for someone who just said that they grew up on sitcoms. I'm basing this on a lot. The two key things for me is that the show ended, I felt, just at the right time that it needed to end. They didn't stretch that shit out forever. And it was very hard for me to think of favorite episodes. Like, this was harder than calculus for me because I've never seen an episode of this show that wasn't funny.
Right. I don't think there's always moments in these episodes that are funny, which is a hard thing to pull off.
The writing, man. Listen, when it comes to writing a family sitcom, get these people on board. Get Linwood Boomer, get Steve Welsh, get Matthew Carlson, get Steve Love, get Alex Reed, get Chris Masterson. These were some of the principal writers on that show, and their writers' room was pretty stacked. Even Bryan Cranston wrote a couple episodes. Yeah, he wrote like the episode called Malcolm Defends Reese, and Christopher Masterson, who plays Francis, he wrote the episode called Hal Grieves. These writers know what they're doing. The actors know what they're doing. There's great synchronicity happening here.
Right, and I mean Brian, and then like obviously like Hal, like Bryan Cranston, he would go on from this show to be like a mega star. If you have to give this series like an overall grade.
Excellent. And please, for the love of God, wait a good 20 years before you try to reboot this shit, you guys.
Same. I would give this, it's a solid good. Being tough on the grading, it's still a good. Like we said, the show has a good rhythm, I think, from the pilot. The writers and everybody who makes the show really understands who these characters are. There is growth, I think, from all of the characters. And I think that particularly is a hard thing to do with a sitcom, because the whole point of a sitcom is that it's just these same people doing the same stuff. Like, that's sort of the point of it. You have to find a uniformity. And that happens in this show, but these characters still grow. They still learn new things. They change over time. And that's an extremely hard thing to do, I think, on a sitcom, which is all about being uniform and having a specific and making sure the voice never changes. It's really quite impressive. And there you have it, folks. This is everything that we think made Malcolm in the Middle good, bad, and basic. If you'd like to watch or rewatch this series, Malcolm in the Middle is currently streaming on Hulu.
Malcolm in the Middle was the perfect storm of casting, writing, acting, and direction that made for a fun, innovative, and deeply memorable sitcom. So often when we discuss series, we often speak of what could have been done better, but with this one, the mistakes were few and far between. We hope that you all have enjoyed hearing our thoughts on this modern classic. Patrons, be sure to check out the GBB Malcolm in the Middle Spotify playlist.
Tune in next week when Em and I will be discussing HBO's hit family drama, Big Love. If you want to watch or relive this series, be Big Love is currently streaming over at Amazon Prime, as well as Hulu with the HBO add-on, and directly at HBO.com. Until then, our top tier patrons can tune into our next movie review episode, where Em and I will be discussing the romantic period drama In the Mood for Love. If you're not on this tier yet, level up. You don't want to miss out on this episode. We'll be joined by special guest Kieran Scarlett of the You Started It podcast. If you want to watch or rewatch In the Mood for Love before then, it's currently streaming on the Canopy app and the Criterion channel, as well as Fubo TV. The episode goes live this Saturday.
Follow The Good, the Bad, the Basic on all major podcast platforms to listen to all of our regular weekly episodes on the go. If you love this sort of content and want more, become a show producer and patron on Patreon. You can find us at patreon.com/goodbadbasic. Your support allows us to keep bringing you our regular weekly episodes, as well as exclusive bonus material.
Be sure to follow us at Good Bad Basic Pod on Twitter. And of course, follow our SoundCloud page, The Good, the Bad, the Basic, where all of our social media links are listed. Until next time.
Bye,
Bye, everyone.